Hi everyone. I want to tell you my testimony. I've been told my testimony is God used some kind of spectacular ways to get my attention compared to other people. I didn't come to faith by reading the Bible for myself or studying apologetics, the arguments for the faith. But my story is shaped me to who I am today. And it was the most impactful experience of my life. And I just want to tell my story. When I was 6 years old, I don't know exactly how close it was to my birthday, I became a Christian at 6 years old. I said a prayer of salvation with my mother. My parents are very good people, and my dad is a righteous man, and my mother is a bend over backwards for you type of woman. She's always in my corner, I feel like. And they instilled the faith in me in a young age. And so at the age of 6 years old, I said a prayer of salvation with my mother. And I've always been drawn to more complicated, more deep music. So, for example, on my birthday, for my 6th birthday, I recall that I was sitting in the living room, and my parents said, "Hey Jesse, do you hear what's going on?" Well, what happened was they had called into the local radio station, and they had had them play the coloring song by Petra. So even at a young age, I was into rock, you could say, heavier sounding music, and I don't have any idea if that song actually had an impact on me coming to faith or not. I don't know. It very well could. Anyways, fast forwarding to the time I was maybe 8 years old or so, I was not terrified, I was scared of the dark, and I was afraid that there would be something under my bed that would grab my leg. Now, that you might think that's normal, but it was quite severe for me, to the point that I would jump into bed rather than just getting into bed. And so I say that to lay the backdrop to the idea that being paranoid has had a substantial effect on my life. So one of those nights that I was in bed, I was praying, and I remember I had this gigantic pillow. It must have been this big, by this thick, and it was my parents eventually got rid of it because it probably got dirty or whatever, and they couldn't wash it, so they got rid of it. But I remember I'm laying there in bed, and I was almost weeping with the presence of God, and I was thinking to myself, "Oh dear Lord, I pray that you would keep me." I specifically remember praying that with tears, because I didn't want to have to fall away from God later in my life. This is a memory that only surfaced to me in my 30s after the experience that saved me for good. Anyways, all throughout grade school, all throughout middle school, all throughout high school, I was pretty much a loner. I never felt like I fit in. I never felt like I was one of the guys. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. In high school, I would go over to the pastor's house, because they had a kid there that was around my age that I would hang out with. Only on the weekends, never during the week. But he was kind of like my weekend friend, along with another friend that I know. But that was basically it. That was the extent of my social engagement with people. And we would do these all-nighters where I would come over at about, I don't know what time, 3 o'clock or something like that in the afternoon on Saturday. And we would spend the night at this guy's house, stay up till like 4 o'clock, wake up early, and go to church. So we get like 4 hours of sleep. We didn't really get much. That was a vineyard church. The vineyard church that I used to go to, has since gotten really progressive, which I don't agree with. Really affirming and saying they're an ally and God accepts everyone and, whatever. But I never really felt like I trusted these guys. After I graduated high school, there was this girl that I knew. In fact, I was working on my AIM back in the day, AOL Instant Messenger. If you guys are familiar with that, I'm dating myself at this point. And there was this name that I didn't know what it was. So it was, I won't say the name, but I remember what it was. And I contacted them. I was like, hey, who is this? I don't know who this is. And they told me who it was. And I know that she was kind of a rebel sort of girl. And I think she was 16 at the time. And I had just graduated high school, so I graduated high school at 19 years old. My birthday's in May. So the next year, I actually contacted her. And why did I say this? I don't know. But I said, hey, it would be cool if we could smoke weed sometime. And I was just being, maybe I can hang out with this person. Next thing you know, we're in a relationship. I mean, for my end, I don't know what she thinks. She probably just thought I was a boy toy or whatever. And she probably didn't take me very seriously, and that's fine. Whatever. I've done away with that part of my life. She broke it off after that summer, whatever. She didn't want to see me anymore, so I was crushed. I had such guilt over this, partly because I was hanging out with a bad group of guys. I mean, these are guys that, you would think would be, dealing drugs and in gangs and that sort of thing. And I think they wanted me around to kind of keep me as a sort of mascot or like a kind of, like to bully me around or whatever. And I was smoking dope with these guys. I got introduced to dope through this girl, and I never really smoked it regularly before then. And I started smoking on a regular basis kind of thing. And the next thing I know, I developed psychosis. I kept thinking that was not right, and the guilt got to me to the point that I think part of the issue was I was smoking marijuana, and part of the issue was it was guilt-induced psychosis. So I developed a mental illness. The name of my mental illness is called schizoaffective disorder. And I think it was in 2012 I got put on disability. I've always had trouble with my sleep. Luckily, thankfully nowadays I have it somewhat under control, pretty well under control. But for most of my adult life, I would spend, it would be a routine for me to spend, 36 hours awake and 16 hours of sleep. So that was just my regular routine. And the reason I did that is because I was paranoid, really paranoid, going back to earlier. And I would think somebody was in my room about to do horrible things to me. Because I was during my early, out of high school, I went to a couple of dojos for martial arts, and I always thought they didn't like me and that they were mad at me and they were going to hurt me. So I would imagine these people in my room that they were about to hurt me, and there was nothing I could do about it. But I found out that if I stayed awake, then I wouldn't be paranoid. That if I was out doing something and not in bed and the lights were dark or whatever, I wouldn't be afraid. So I started staying up longer so that I wouldn't have to go to sleep. And so when I would go to sleep, I would fall asleep immediately because I was so tired. Anyways, one time I'm lying in bed, And I don't know if I was totally asleep or almost asleep, but what I do know is I heard a noise audibly. And it sounded like the snarling of an animal. But it wasn't an animal. All I can think of is it was a demon. And that was a very real encounter that I had. And it freaked me out like crazy because I was so exhausted because I had been awake for so long. And I lay down and I can't sleep. And this experience wakes me up, and all of a sudden I'm not wide awake. I'm still really tired, like I can't even focus. But all I know is I don't want to be awake. That was just an experience I had to demonstrate kind of the depravity that I was in at the time. And so I kind of decided, because of my paranoid delusions, I imagined that they wanted to hurt me because I was a Christian. How did I get that idea? I don't know. But that was the working theory. So I decided that I would call myself an atheist so that I wouldn't have to worry about being persecuted. Now, of course, that didn't do anything to my paranoid delusions. I would still go to bed and be terrified. But that's what I tried to do to mitigate the fear. Because when it's real to you, you literally don't know what's real and what's not. And on some level, I sort of knew it wasn't real, but it's just, you can't fully get yourself there. It's like you feel it in your gut, but your head knows that it's not true. Anyways, I went to therapy. When was this? It must have been 2017, 2018. I must have gone there for 2 years, I think. And that was the start of my mental health getting better. Now, I still dealt with things, and I still barely made group enough to not get kicked out. This was a group therapy session. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is basically like cognitive behavioral therapy, except they incorporate mindfulness into that. And they had some weird ideas. I think there was like circulation of trans people in the group therapy, which just goes to show, if I came across 3 or 4 different trans people out of a group of like 8, and they're all in this mental health field, it just goes to show that trans people generally have some kind of mental illness going on, or it's very common for them. Let's just put it that way. So I learned some skills on how to ground myself and things like that. I graduated from DBT therapy, and I stayed longer than a lot of other people. I think the reason for that was my mental illness is not conductive. DBT is not conductive to treating schizoaffective disorder. So basically, it was an inappropriate therapy for me. Now, I still learned some things from it. I still got some things from it. But it wasn't as helpful as it could have been as if it was CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Anyways, in 2019, I moved into my own place, December 2nd, 2019. And this is when the first time that I had gotten regular with my shots. I used to get a shot every 2 weeks. It's an antipsychotic shot, and it's supposed to keep me sane, and I think it does. But this is when I moved out of my parents' house, that's when things really started to get better. But let me tell you about an experience that changed my life forever, in between that time that I was in therapy and the time that I moved into my own apartment. It was August 24th, 2018. So a little backstory about where I was in my spiritual life. I considered myself an atheist because of paranoia. And then I read the book Psychological Types by Carl G. Jung. And that book turned me into a pantheist, even though he was a sort of a spiritualist, sort of a atheist, agnostic type of person. I saw the complexity of the human mind, and I realized that there had to be a God. A God had to be able to create minds with agency, and so I developed a theory. My theory at the time was that the universe itself was a God, and the universe created beings within itself that could be self-aware, so that the universe could within itself discover itself. And on some level that makes sense. But then on a hot August day, I remember I went outside. I think I had a cigarette or something like that, and I was nervous. I don't know why I was nervous. I was nervous for some reason. Paranoid, you could say. And I went back down from the porch down to my computer. Yes, I was a basement dwelling person into my 30s. But anyways, I saw this video. I went downstairs and I watched a video. You know what the video was? It was a music video for Alive by POD. And I got up and I went out and I had a cigarette. And as I walked outside, I felt like I was supposed to go outside for some reason. I don't know why. I just felt like this urge, you have to go outside. And I go outside and this guy walks into the driveway. My parents' driveway. As I'm standing, just inside the porch, I see him coming up, and I was outside or something, or I ended up seeing him walk into the driveway. And he was kind of a heavyset guy. He was wearing a white button-up shirt. I can't remember if it was short sleeve or long sleeve, but I think it was long sleeve. He was wearing khaki pants, and he was wearing a bow tie. And he kind of looked like how you would imagine a homeless person dressing up, putting on their best clothing and getting dressed up for something. That's what he looked like. Because it wasn't fancy clothes, and it wasn't, he didn't look great, but he looked like he was dressed up for something. And I went out there and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And we exchanged. He said, "Hi, Jesse, it's nice to meet you." In between the two times that I went upstairs into the porch, between the first time I went there and I was nervous, and then I went downstairs and I watched a POD video of Alive, and then I went up again. Why that's significant is because when I first met him, he said, "Oh, you look like a skateboarder." And the POD video of Alive, like, there's a skateboarder that literally gets his car T-boned by a bus. My dad drives a bus. He drove the bus for 30 years. But, like, his car got T-boned, flipped over, and then he got out and he was fine. Well, I actually got in a car accident and one time, and I totaled the car and I flipped the car. And I got out and I was fine. The other thing is, I ran into Sony, the lead singer of POD. So the crazy thing is that I went to watch this POD concert, and I ran into Sony before the concert, and I told him the whole experience. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but usually you can't run into the lead singer of the main act before the show and just talk to him for like 15 minutes. He was talking to me about this booklet thing, and I thought he wanted money from me. I just thought he was a panhandler. I just thought he was going house to house looking for money. I said, "Sorry, I don't have money for you, but I have prayer for you." And I still don't, to this day, know why I said that, because at this time I was a pantheist. My faith was the least important thing to me at this time. And he said, "Well, prayer is good too." And we shook hands, and I walked away. And then after he walked away, I thought, okay, I want to go on my walk where I usually go. So I got in my van, and I drove down the road to the park. That is like there's some water, right? It's a park with water. And there's a pond on one side, and there's a lake on the other. Now, walking the whole thing total is about a mile or a mile and a half, no more than that. Takes about 20 minutes to walk around the thing. And the short body of water is like, anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes to walk. On the walk around the smaller body of water, I reflected on the handshake he gave me, and I just started sobbing because it just felt like the most honest, humble touch that you've ever gotten from someone. And really gentle and not forceful and not but strong. It just hard to explain what he had strong hands, but he didn't use a strong grip, if that makes sense. It would, And there's this line in the middle. There's this bridge in the middle that separates the water. So you have a big group over here and a small group over here. And I was deciding, where I was going to walk, and I walk around, and I get to this junction here. You got the big place to walk here. And I felt like the Holy Spirit convicted me at that point. And it felt like he was saying, do you want to live to yourself and go the long way, or do you want to follow me and go the short way? And I didn't even know why I was thinking this at the time. And now looking back on it, I know it was just the Holy Spirit moving in me. And so I sat there and contemplated for what seemed like forever, but it was probably like a minute. That's probably all the longer it was. So I took the short way home. And on the way home, I thought, I have to see this guy again. There's something about him. So I'm driving down the road, and I drive down. We have my parents live. You want to think about there's a square that kind of goes like this, and on this side there's a main street, and on this side it's just this way, this way, this way, and that's all the roads that there are. There's no connecting roads besides that in this. And I drive down the closest street, the closest road to me, because my parents lived on the end here, on this street here, not on the perpendicular streets that go here and here. My parents live on this street here. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out which way it is, and it's reversed, so it's hard to do. Anyways, I drive down the first road, and I pull into the driveway, and I thought, he's not here, where is he? And so I pull out, and I go back the way I came, and I go down the road to the second street, right? Remember, that's a square, so the second perpendicular road to the road where my parents live, I turn down that road. As I turn down that road, I see him coming down the steps of somebody's house. And I thought, well, that's weird. But I found him, and I felt like that alone was a miracle, that I actually found the guy after being gone for, whatever. And I found him, and I said, okay, I gotta park somewhere. I'm kind of like hyped up at this moment. And so I pull on the side of the road, and I walk up to him, and I said, hey, I had to see you again. And I can't remember what he said to that. Anyways, we start talking, and all of a sudden he starts talking about how he has all these problems with his body. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I say, oh, you're a good man. And I'm like sobbing as I'm saying this, and he said in a very calm, gentle voice, oh, this is good. And so we just started talking, and it came to the point where I just sat down on the curb, and he was standing in the street. And strange thing is, there was only one encounter with another human being, or another being, in this whole endeavor. From the time that I went on my walk, because usually there's people on the path that you see, nobody was there. My parents weren't home, so I never ran into them. And there was no one driving down the road during the time either. And so I sit on the curb, and he just starts talking about the kingdom of heaven. There's different segments of what he talked about, but sometimes I was standing, sometimes I was sitting, and I just felt like my spirit was overflowing. That's what it felt like. It felt heavy. That's kind of what it felt like. It felt like, whoa, this is heavy stuff. And why it was heavy is because it felt like when he was speaking to me, he was reading my mind. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not just using that as a kind of way to talk. He was talking as though he was reading my thoughts. And he talked about how, this one guy likes you and this other guy doesn't like you. Guys that I used to hang out with. And he never said their names, but how did he know that there was two guys that I used to hang out with and one likes me and one doesn't? Because that's the reality. And so he was reading into like in my mind like what I was thinking. And I sat down and he started to explain this booklet that he had. And it was like a thing that you had to write your name just to support him, so he would sell these books or something like that. And so I was like looking at it and opening it up and trying to figure out what it meant. It was like numbers associated with it and packages, and that you just had to sign your name to support him or something like that. And I didn't understand what was going on with this. And he had a place that you could sign your name, so I signed my name. And I thought, oh, I should put a number there. So I put a number there, and he's like, oh, what was the number for? I can't remember what happened. I thought, no, I don't want to write the number. So I was about to cross the number out, and he says, oh, don't cross it out. And I was like, no, I'm crossing it out, so I crossed the number out. I don't know what significance that has, but that was just something I thought. There were like magazines or like small books that he would sell that you just sign your name to support him, basically. And so he talked about the kingdom of heaven, and at one point he says, the kingdom of heaven is like you're driving down the road and somebody sees the bad condition that your road is in, and someone sees the bad condition that your car is in, and they decide to buy you a new vehicle because they know you can't afford one. And he says that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. And that just stuck with me, that you're not looking for it, you're not trying to get it, but in some sense that makes sense, that's the way the church operates, or the way the church should operate, is that you are looking out for the benefit of others. And he says you don't know them, but they know you, and they're going to give you a vehicle. And it wasn't until, I think it was either 2022 or 2023, I think it was November of 2000 or October of 2023, that I had been without a vehicle for like 7 months, and all of a sudden my pastor decided he wanted to give me his old vehicle, so I got a vehicle for free. And so that was a prophecy that sort of came true, and that's what the whole conversation was like with this guy. And he was talking like all these things, and he was like prophesying, and he was like talking about the valley of dry bones, and I didn't even know to call it the valley of dry bones, but that's what he was talking about. And he says, are those your bones? And that also struck with me. But there's a lot that I forgot, but it was just like the whole conversation was like a pound of bricks being dumped on you constantly, like a wave in the ocean just smacking you upside the head. Like that's what it felt like, a spiritual tsunami of emotion and everything like that. Anyways, at one point he is sitting there talking to me, and this guy drives up with his car, and he parks his car on the side of the road. And he gets out of his car, and he's this big guy, this big white guy with a ponytail. And he's got this big cardboard box, and I didn't know what the cardboard... Like, this is all like I'm seeing in the spirit or something because of the situation. I'm thinking, is this guy with the ponytail, this big guy, is he dropping something spiritual off at the house because they rejected this guy's message? That's what I'm thinking to myself when I'm witnessing all this. And he puts the box in the house, and then he's walking back, and the two of them have this really super casual conversation. And I have no idea what they said. I don't know why I didn't pick up what they said, but for whatever reason, I have no idea what they said. And I thought, wow, is this big guy, is he an angel? Is that who this is? And the guy that I was speaking with before, so I thought the guy that I was speaking with was an angel, because I thought the guy with the ponytail was an angel. And the guy looks at me and he goes, I'm not an angel. Before I had ever inclination of asking him, I was just thinking, wow, is this guy an angel? Because that's what the conversation was like, crazy. And he looks at me and he goes, I'm not an angel. And I said, okay, wow, okay, I don't know who this guy is. And at one point in the conversation, I never told a soul about this, why I considered myself an atheist, because of fear of persecution. And this guy that I was talking to, he looks at me and he goes, you know, if you call yourself a Christian, you could be persecuted for your faith. Is it worth it? It was up to that point, everything he said up to that point, until the current point. And I thought about it, and it was at that point I really had to die to myself. I had to say, okay, even if I get persecuted, and this guy talking about one likes you and one doesn't like you, and one of them might hurt you, and he's talking about this stuff, and he says, meanwhile I'm thinking, what he's saying is just blowing my mind, and with all my fear of persecution or whatever, he says, if you call yourself a Christian, you could be persecuted for your faith. Is it worth it? And I thought about it, and I died to myself, and I had to struggle with my deepest fear, and I said, yes, it's worth it. That was when everything changed. And anyways, we're talking, and I say, and I'm sitting on the curb, and he's expounding all these things to me, and I don't remember most of it, but all I remember is it was impactful. And he says, can we go in your van? My knee's starting to bother me. Because I was thinking at the time, well, maybe I should take him in my van to, get him some food or something like that. And we're standing outside the van, and I say, you're a prophet. And he said, big P or small P? But he was disappointed before he said, I'm a prophet. And he looked like disappointed. And he said, big P or small P? And I said, the biggest. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but I think it's John 6:14 that describes the Messiah would be the prophet. And the prophet in this verse is capital. It's capital P. So he was asking me, am I the big P prophet? Now, I had no idea about this verse at the time. I had to figure all this stuff out later. But that's what he said, and I said, yeah, the biggest. And so we get in the car, and we're driving to my house, and he slams this pack of Newport cigarettes. He didn't smoke one, he just smacked the pack on the ground, on the dashboard, or on the console in the middle between the seats. And I thought, did this guy do something with did this guy do something with this guy that I don't like before, and that's why I was nervous when I first went out to outside before watching Be Alive? Anyways, we go in my house, one of the things he said about me is that I'm like David in the Bible. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, weird, whatever. And I never associated myself with like being like David in the Bible. But we get into the house, and my dad, I cannot remember this ever happening at another point in my life, but my dad had his Bible out on the counter, and it's opened up, and it's talking about the genealogy of David and how he's a prophet, whatever, how he's a great king or whatever. It's like confirmation that what he's saying is true. It's like, how could this possibly happen just by chance? That he was telling me I was like David, and the next thing you know, my dad's Bible is open talking about David and how he's a great king or whatever. So when we get inside the house, I say, do you want some food? I can make you some food. And he said, I don't need to eat food, but if you make me food, I will eat it. And so I had these frozen dinners, right? One of them was what was the name of it? One of them was chicken fried steak or something like that, and the other one was something else that was really similar. And they were both in a cardboard box. You microwave them. And I hold them out to him. I said, "Which one do you want?" And he looks at them and he just stares at them for a while, and he goes like this. And I secretly want him to pick a certain one. I thought, is this guy gonna pick the right one or not? And he did pick the right one. I mean, it's only a 50-50 chance, but I mean, it was a test, right? And he picked the right one, and he had to think about it. That's the other thing. He didn't just grab one. He said, that one. And anyways, then I dropped him off at the Arby's by my parents' house, and then that was the end of the conversation. And my faith has absolutely never been the same since. I've never doubted since that time. I've thought a lot about what I would do for my faith, and it all stems back to this conversation with this guy where he asked me, he said, if you call yourself a Christian, you could be persecuted for your faith. Is it worth it? And I've taken that so seriously that I've thought about so much. Would I be willing to die for my faith? And so, yeah. So, that's my story, guys. I've never been the same. I've never doubted. I've been through hard things, but I've always maintained my faith, and that's what my faith is based on. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you later.